If you've been following along this offseason, you know that I have been breaking down some of the biggest injuries heading into 2025. We're talking about elite make or break your draft players. And despite my best efforts, the one name that seems to come up more often than not is a guy that isn't even being taken inside the top 36 wide receivers on Underdog right now. Everyone seems to want to know about Chris Godwin. I see the comments in my previous videos. I see our Discord channel asking me all the time, Doc, what is going on with Chris Godwin? Is his ankle okay? Is he practicing? I get it. People love Chris Godwin. I don't totally understand it, but the people have spoken and they want answers regarding Chris and Godwin. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down everybody's favorite wide receiver for 2025. Like my previous draft or past videos, we're going to start with what do we know? And I like to start with the actual facts because there's going to be some speculation in this video on my part. And I think it's better if we just lay down the foundation with things that we absolutely know are true. First off, we know that Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 2 in all of fantasy through the first 7 weeks of last season, just 0.3 points behind this year's consensus wide receiver 1, Jamar Chase. We also know that in week 7, he dislocated his left ankle, which included a fibula fracture and ankle sprain as well, specifically a high ankle sprain. He had surgery at the time, which was most likely to address the fibula fracture, but may have also included a procedure to retighten the ligaments of the ankle. I'm not going to go into the medical stuff as much today, but just know it was a pretty extensive repair. Now, this spring, he had a second surgery to clean out the ankle joint and possibly remove hardware from his previous surgery. We don't know a lot about the second surgery. We just know that he had one and it was to clean out the ankle. And currently he's being listed on the active PUP list, but the team does believe that he is doing well and may not actually miss any game time this season. Which leads us to question number 2, which is what does the data say about this injury? Now, sadly, there's not a lot of info regarding ankle dislocations in the literature specifically, but there are ankle injury studies that we can look at, which do include this type of injury. And there's a lot of data regarding ankle injuries in the NFL. A study on ankle fractures in the NFL actually saw that 29% of players never returned to the field after a major ankle fracture. That number is on par with other major ankle injuries like ACL and Achilles tears, which is something to note. The other thing is that players with major ankle injuries saw an average of 22.6% decrease in power rating in their first year back post-injury, and that jumps up to 35%. So a 35% decrease in power ratings 2 years after these injuries. We also know that players on average play 1.6 fewer games in their first year back, and that jumps up to 2.25 fewer games in their second year back. So this is not an injury that just goes away after a year. It seems to linger and actually become more of a problem as they get farther away from it. Up to 70% of players suffer from recurrent ankle sprains and instability after a major ankle injury. The normal recovery timeline for something like this is about 4 months, sometimes up to 6. So he had a little bit more of an intense injury. There was more going on. I would not be surprised with a complicated injury like this that it would take over 6 months. All that is to say, the data doesn't really support that Chris Godwin will be better this year than he was last year. In fact, he's most likely going to be significantly worse. This leads us to question number 3. What are the Bucs saying with their moves this offseason and to the media about this injury specifically? And this is more reading in between the lines by me, but I do think there's some relevant things to know about the Bucs' point of view. They still do believe that Chris Godwin has the ability to help their team. They could have opted not to pay him this offseason. However, they did give him a 3-year extension instead, which means that they still have a plan for Chris Godwin on the squad. The team has also been consistent this offseason, dating all the way back to April and May, saying that they would slow play his training camp and that they remained optimistic that he would be able to play in week 1. So they have not wavered on that as the offseason has gone along. According to them, he is still on track to play in week 1. But we also know that the team drafted Emeka Egbuka in the first round of the NFL draft. The team's GM, Jason Licht, specifically denied that this was related to Chris Godwin's rehab way back in May, but he did mention that the team was 0-3 when both Godwin and Evans were out last season, alluding to the idea that receiver depth due to injury was something of a concern when they were drafting Egbuka. So they know that there are injury risks on this team and they wanted more depth at the wide receiver position, which leads us to our final question. What are we doing with Chris Godwin, and are we drafting him or passing on him in 2025? If you couldn't tell, I will be passing on Chris Godwin in 2025. One of two things is most likely to happen. Option 1, his ankle is not ready for him to start the season. He immediately loses all of training camp and touches early to not one, but two young stud wide receivers in Emeka Egbuka and Jalen McMillan, and he does eventually return later in the year and steps into a limited role for the rest of the season. Or option 2, he gets cleared to practice and is removed from the PUP list during training camp, making it likely that he plays in week 1. That sounds like a great option, except for the fact that his ADP will likely reflect the new optimism that he is healthy and jump up another round or 2, basically negating the positive effect that you were getting from the injury ADP. He then still spends the entire year in a committee with those two young wide receivers and Mike Evans and Cade Otton, and you wait for someone to get hurt so that Chris Godwin gets an opportunity. Statistically speaking, based on their injury histories, which is our best predictor of future injury, who's the most likely to get hurt? Yep, Chris Godwin. So regardless of how this plays out this offseason, I think for fantasy players, it's just not going to turn out well if you're drafting Chris Godwin. I don't trust players coming off of major ankle injuries because history tells us that it's just not a good idea. Don't forget that Odell Beckham Jr. in 2017 had a very similar type of injury, major ankle injury. He comes back, he misses 4 games the next season, barely breaks 1,000 yards in back-to-back years, and is never a wide receiver 1 in fantasy again. He was 4 years younger than Chris Godwin when that happened. What about Tank Dell last season? He had 2 less yards per reception and nearly 20 less yards per game coming off of his major ankle injury, half as many touchdowns in 3 more games as well as the year before, and he ends the season on IR with another major injury for the second year in a row. He's 5 years younger than Chris Godwin was when this happened. The best case that I could find in terms of wide receivers coming off of this was Randall Cobb's 2014 after breaking his fibula in 2013, but that was a less complicated injury. He didn't have an ankle dislocation with it. He had nearly 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns, which sounds pretty good if you look at it on paper. He played 9 more seasons after that, never broke 900 yards again. He was also 6 years younger than Chris Godwin, and because of that isolated fibula fracture without the dislocation, it's not really a fair comparison. My point is that I just don't draft players hoping for outliers. He had a major ankle injury. He's on a team that drafted his replacement, and he needed 2 surgeries to correct the issue, and he's still not practicing nearly 9 months after the fact. That's not a normal recovery timeline for even a complicated version of this injury. It's just not the type of situation that I'm looking to invest in for fantasy, and my hope is that you won't either. That's all I got for you this week. Hopefully you enjoyed this breakdown of Chris Godwin. If you did like the video, subscribe to the channel. Fantasy football is right around the corner, and if you haven't already, make sure you head over to tfhdraftguide.com and get your copy of the Fantasy Headliners 2025 Draft Guide. It's the only place you'll find my draft and don't draft lists for all of the injured players coming back this season. It's a great resource for anybody who's got questions about maybe some of the minor guys that we haven't had a chance to do specific videos on. You'll see Chris Godwin in there as well. Didn't think that I would actually be doing a full video on Chris Godwin, but the people demanded an answer. This year, we're doing things a little bit differently on the channel when it comes to injuries. So the best place to find injury updates is going to be on our exclusive Discord. Hit the join button down below, become a member of Headliner Nation, get in the Discord, where you will see an update list from me, updated almost to the minute of when injuries occur throughout the NFL season. You'll also get all of my opinions about those minor players because we are doing things a little differently. I've gotten a lot busier in my normal life running a clinic and doing doctor things. So things have gotten a little bit different on the channel, but again, the best place to get injury information this year is going to be in our Headliner Discord. So if you haven't already, hit the join button and become a member today.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.